Hey everyone, it's Glenn here from Alter Egos. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we start this week's episode of Experimental Research. I wanted to just say a special thank you to those of you who have supported this series so far. We've really enjoyed sharing the deck lists and talking about deck building more widely. We appreciate the support and we hope that many of you hope to be involved in a more active way moving forward. If you'd like to share your deck list and be on the show, you can send an email to alteregosmcpodcast@gmail.com. Any and every listener is welcome to contribute. We have guests booked until the end of November currently, but if you'd like to get involved over Christmas period, December and January, do feel free to send us an email. This week, we have Joey, the co-host of Alter Egos, share with us a special Goliath-focused deck list. Next week, we'll have Drew, one of the prominent deck builders in the community, share a deck list that he's been putting together over the past few weeks. Moving on from there, we'll have some of the other more prominent deck builders that you see around the Discord and on Reddit join us for different discussions of decks that they've created. So thank you once again, everyone, for supporting this series. We hope you enjoy this week's episode, and you can check out our regular episodes focused on the Rise of Red Skull campaign box on Wednesdays at 5 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time. Thanks everyone, and enjoy this episode. And welcome back to Alter Egos, a Marvel Champion fan podcast with your host, Glenn. And with me this week is Joey from Alter Egos also. How's it going, Joey?
All right. How about yourself?
Not too bad, not too bad. This is episode 2 of our experimental research mini-series in which we're deep diving into different sort of deck builds and heroes. And each fortnight, as the hosts of Alter Egos, we'll be putting together a deck ourselves just to talk through and share. And so this week, Joey has done that for us. And so, Joey, what deck are we going to be talking about this week?
Okay, so this week we're talking about my deck, which is a Black Widow leadership deck that I've called Alias Davina. It's a Goliath-focused. It's a Goliath-focused leadership deck trying to reset Goliath as many times as possible so that you can reuse his ability constantly turn to turn. You can't reuse it on the same turn because of the max 1 per turn, but you can reset him, have him back in play, and then use him again a turn later to get the +4 attack again and continue swinging for a ton, because that's what Goliath does currently.
Yeah, it's interesting. He kind of got introduced as this sort of big sort of I guess blunt instrument to deal a bunch of damage, but also remove some threat if needed. You may have mentioned already, but is your deck designed for solo play or multiplayer?
Yep. In this case, it's designed for solo play, mostly because I just didn't put in some of the pieces I feel like you need for multiplayer. But it could work in either. I feel like it's a little greedy for multiplayer, and I think there's some changes you could make that would make it better for that purpose. So it is primarily a solo deck.
Okay, and how did the idea come about for this deck?
So the idea for this deck came about because I was looking at the new Red Skull cards, and I was just trying to think of what's something new that we can do now that we couldn't do before. And previously, most of the good leadership allies were all thwart-focused. There was actually very few attack-focused allies, but Goliath is obviously a big example for a attack-focused ally, being that he can be one of the highest attack allies in the game at the moment. On par with enraged Hercules.
Yeah, it's a good description and comparator, I guess. Why did you choose the hero that in this case Black Widow?
Yep. So Black Widow was chosen because she has the ability to recur the rapid response using her safe house. She's the only character that can recur preparation cards currently, and the rapid response is the limiting factor on how many times you can actually trigger the combo. Because between Earth's Mightiest Heroes, Get Ready, you can have up to 6 copies. I'm only running 5 of cards that can ready Goliath, but allowing you to attack twice with him in the same turn to trigger the combo, basically. But you can't. You can only get very rapid response. You can normally only get very rapid responses per deck cycle, whereas with Black Widow, you can get more by flipping to Alter Ego, drawing the card, putting it down for basically free because of your gauntlets. And that is a big plus for Black Widow that other characters didn't have.
Yeah, and you've already mentioned sort of that it's a deck focused on Goliath, but is that why you picked this aspect in this case?
Yeah. I had to pick a leadership in order to play Goliath. The reset stuff is all in leadership as well, so it really needs to be a leadership deck.
Yep. And so, what is your deck trying to accomplish overall? Like, what's its game plan?
So my game plan is it's partially the standard Black Widow game plan where you're trying to build up as many of your preps as possible, but also I want to get Goliath on the board. I want to have a rapid response, and I want to have enough Get Readies and Earth's Mightiest Heroes to trigger Goliath enough times that he actually dies, so I can use rapid response to put him back into play. And once he's back into play after however many readies and whatnot, he's no longer affected by his ability. You leave him until next turn, and then you do it again next turn. Repeat until the villain is dead.
Yeah,
that is my actual.
I mean, it's as good a game plan as you're going to get in Marvel Champions. It's nice to see that it's done with an ally, at least in this case. So, I guess more specifically, how is your deck dealing damage?
Okay, so the damage on the villain is almost entirely done by Goliath. I don't normally swing with anyone else unless I've got nothing else to do. I actually normally use Black Widow herself and the Winter Soldier to clear threat. But I'm also running Wonder Man and Black Knight and Squirrel Girl, and Hawkeye, actually. They're all there to try and generally to try and just clear minions. Because you don't really want to be wasting a Goliath trigger on clearing minions, and your two fraught characters, your Winter Soldier and your Black Widow, kind of need to be on the threat game. So that's that's how I'm dealing damage. I'm using Goliath for the villain damage, and then I'm using anything that can clear minions to clear minions.
Yeah, and is there particular allies that you're focused on one than the other?
What do you mean by that?
Like I guess dividing up the minions versus the villain damage.
Yeah.
Particular allies that you target either way.
Anything that's not Goliath focuses on minions. But if there's no minions, you start swinging at the villain if you can. If there's retaliate, you just stop swinging at the villain altogether and wait for more minions to come out. Yeah, War Machine is in here as well. War Machine, Winter Soldier, and Black Widow herself are fraughters rather than damage dealers normally.
Yeah, so I was going to just ask, so how is your deck focused on removing threat, and is it really just through, again, the ally gameplay? Is there any additional tips or tricks for that, or is it really just the allies and Black Widow herself doing all the threat removal?
Well, there's also the Covert Ops. It's a really strong card. It's very much worth it. It's worth, I would say, significantly more than the Dance of Death, even though the Dance of Death can be useful in particular board states. I'm much more likely to play Covert Ops, and you play that as many times as you can, provided it's not impacting your actual game plan. But that's it for the threats. Occasionally, Goliath will do some frauding, but that means I've got 3 to 4 characters that are able to fraud for 2 a turn. That's more than enough in solo to keep the threat down.
Yeah, that's great. And how are you kind of stopping damage as you're trying to build up your board state? Presumably, you've obviously trying to build towards Goliath being in play to start swinging for high amounts of damage. So how do you stop being overwhelmed by villain attacks or minion attacks in the meantime?
Yeah, I typically sacrifice some of my other allies. Get them to nearly dead, and then sacrifice them as jump blockers. But there's also a few times, particularly if I get the Simp Suit down, I'll start blocking with Black Widow, just because you can ready her with the Simp Suit pretty easily. Even on the hero turn, using rapid response, and that adds a decent amount of extra damage prevention. But the main way is just is jump blocking with the allies. I think I lose about the first, sometimes even the second rapid response to jump blocking with some of my allies, rather than while I'm still trying to get everything set up to have Goliath and start swinging.
So, in your experience, what have you found are the deck strengths?
The main deck strength I feel with this deck is this is one of the fastest decks I've ever played. Even if you count like every aggression deck I've ever played, this just takes off and finishes every scenario super quickly. There's less things getting into play that can mess you up. So if there's less cards being flipped, you've got less effects, less time to get messed up by a unfortunately timed Shadows of the Past or a really bad advance. And that was the main advantage I had of this deck, because it does get set up super quickly. I often have the full build pretty much done by the first deck cycle, and then the game's over like 2 turns later. In fact, a couple times I had the turn I played Goliath was the turn I won, and it was because I was doing 15 plus damage with Goliath alone, which is a lot of damage for a single turn.
Yeah, no, it definitely sounds like you've got a very clean game plan there. I noticed also your list obviously isn't running things like Mansion or Helicarrier, and often lots of people seem to like those sort of resource ramp cards. Do you want to talk a little bit about what happens if you lower your cost curve and kind of focus in on your game plan?
This isn't so much about lowering cost curve. The cost curve is actually relatively high on here because of all the allies in here. The difference, though, is that this deck is mostly preparation cards, and the rest are all Avengers allies. And I have the Avengers Tower as a replacement for Helicarrier. And it's in there because it's less of a tempo hit versus Helicarrier. It's only costing 1 less, but that can be a big deal in some cases. That can be the difference between playing it this turn and playing it next deck cycle. And most of the cards that cost any real amount of resources are all allies. So all allies and Avengers, so you can just make them a little bit cheaper. The Helicarrier and Mansion would be cards I would put in if I was to play multiplayer with this, but in this particular case, they're not in here because they are a pretty big tempo loss. They basically cost you a full turn in solo play, and it takes a while to get that back. And with the speed of this deck, it's hard to justify in solo play.
Yeah, and so I guess from that, what have you found some of the weaknesses are for this deck?
When you're getting set up, you can take a decent amount of damage, and you can end up fairly low. If you're unlucky, you could be very, very low, and even and possibly even risking it on a boost card flip for whether you die or not. That seems to balance out after a little bit. After probably about halfway to somewhere between the half deck of the first deck cycle to the full deck cycle, you've got enough allies and stuff that it evens out. But it's also very reliant on getting those allies, and it doesn't have any inherent way to speed that up. So if you're, what am I up to, 6? I think there's 6 allies in this deck. If they all happen to be at or near the bottom, you could end up in a bit of trouble there. And I've even had to sacrifice a Goliath, I think, early on in one of my games, despite the fact I really wanted him to stay in play for my combo, because I was going to die if I didn't. But overall, I think it's a fairly versatile list and doesn't have any really, really strong flaws.
Well, I mean, that's a good thing, right? You hit a deck list that's going to close the deal a lot of the time. So that's great. Thank you for sharing that. Have you found any particular scenarios that you've enjoyed playing this list into? Like somewhere where, for instance, say someone new with the list might enjoy trying it out, and then maybe a personal preference for yourself?
Yep. So As for enjoyable, because of its speed, I quite liked sending it into Absorbing Man because it actually tracks the number of turns, and genuinely think, speaking, I would think a combo list would be quite slow, but when I was testing it against Absorbing Man, I only had like 4 counters at the end of the game, so it was only like turn 5, which is actually quite fast. And his relatively low hit points means that he dies to Goliath pretty quickly. Rhino was also really fun because you could just get around the like you could ignore the stun on your character. You could get around the tough with Black Knight, and he happens to have a number of his first form has a number of HP that's divisible by 5, which is convenient for Goliath. So that was also an interesting one. But my personal favorite, I think, was Zola, because I thought that was going to be a really bad scenario for it because of the retaliate. Normally, I would think that would be awful for leadership because retaliate 1 just really messes with allies. But it does mess with Goliath a bit because all of a sudden he's taking 3 damage instead of 2, meaning you have to stick at particular breakpoints. But those breakpoints, once you've got team training out, are roughly the same as what you were going to do for the reset anyway. So so when you come back out, you'll with team training, you'll have 4 hit points. You'll take 3 damage from Zola, from attacking Zola, and then you reset, and you've got 1 HP left, and you can attack again anyway, and then come back and do it again. So you can actually still get your 2 attacks in without having to do too much extra.
Yeah, it definitely sounds like a really fun list to play, and I'm going to try and give this list a go this week. So thank you for sharing it. Do you have any piloting tips for those that are giving it a go for the first time? Any tips or tricks?
Don't be afraid to ditch Goliath early. There are 2 make the calls in order to get him back later. It can be a little dicey if you've noticed that both make the calls and Goliath are gone, but you can always get him on the second deck cycle if you really need to, and your deck will be quite a bit smaller by the time you get to the second deck cycle just because of all the preparations you're probably going to be playing due to the gauntlets that you have. The deck really does come online when Goliath is played. So if it is getting like you have got a few things set up, and Goliath is looking kind of still a little dicey because he's quite expensive. You can just throw him down, and even if he just sits there on full hit points for a few turns, or maybe use him to thwart once or twice, he will do a lot for you over the next few turns, even if the first turn plays doesn't look particularly great. So don't feel obligated to play him turn 1 or 2 or like really early in the game. But if you haven't got like a really big play to do this turn, and you've got him in your hand, play him now and leave him for when the combo comes fully online, or use him within reason, because you want to be able to get at least 2 attacks out of him when you boost him up, but you don't need all his hit points for that. You only need generally 3 hit points for that, so you can use the others for thwarting in the meantime.
Yeah, no, that sounds like really sound advice. Usually what we do as part of experimental research now is that I'm going to do a mulligan hand, and I'd just like you to guide me through what you would do in the case of if you were against Expert Claw. So is that all right if we do that?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, so my opening hand is Grappling Hook, Avengers Tower, Attack Acrobatics, Black Widow's Gauntlet, Rapid Response, and Espionage. What do I mulligan and why?
Okay, so you're looking for against Claw. I would think you're looking for some way to clear the Immortal Claw turn 1 a lot of the time. You've got no allies in hand and a few preps. You definitely don't want to mulligan the Gauntlet though. That's way too good. And the Avengers Tower is probably worth keeping as well, because that's basically your entire economy. I'd probably keep the Espionage as the 3rd card and discard the rest. I know Rapid Response is part of my combo, but that would allow me to, if I draw no resource cards and just like completely brick the draw, those 3 cards would let me play Gauntlet, cycle the Espionage for free, and set up a and set up the Avengers Tower. And that's on a brick draw. So I think that's the way to go.
Okay, so if I do that mulligan, I'll let you know what I draw. I then draw Safe House, a second Espionage, and a Rapid Response. So that seems like a pretty good starting turn.
Yeah, I'll use the Espionage to play for the Gauntlet, use the Gauntlet to play the Espionage, draw an extra card. Probably set up the Safe House and draw back the second Espionage. And then I think I have 2 cards left for the Mansion. Not for the Mansion, Tower.
I think that might track. I'm not sure. I think you might be a card short, but
I think the card short is the card I drew with the alter ego ability.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you should be able to do all that. It seems right. So you'd have one prep, the Gauntlet, and the Tower down, along with the Safe House. Yeah, it's not a bad starting turn, really.
Yeah, it's not a bad starting turn, but that wasn't really what I was aiming for against Claw. But it would set you up fairly well for turn 2 and 3, I think.
Yeah, it's making the best of a difficult situation. Well, Joey, thanks for joining us this week on Experimental Research. And as always, the deck list will be in the description. And if you have any questions or want to share your own builds around Goliath, feel free to email them at alteregosmcpodcast@gmail.com. We'll be back next week with another deck list. Joey, thanks for your time.